The very first sign that something was catastrophically wrong with my son was how hard he was breathing. It was not loud, and it was not fast. It was quiet and intensely controlled, like a man who was desperately trying to stop himself from breaking apart in public. His broad chest was rising and falling far too quickly. His dark eyes were darting nervously around the dimly lit room too often. His strong hands were trembling in subtle, erratic ways that he simply could not hide from a mother's watchful gaze. I am Josephine Blake, and this is the exact night everything in my quiet life shifted into a dark, terrifying place I never thought I would have to survive. The massive, formal dining room of the Hayes estate was far too bright. The heavy crystal chandelier, hanging directly above us, hummed with a sharp, continuous buzzing sound that felt like an urgent, physical warning. Fear, it was his fear, it rolled off his skin like thick, suffocating heat. His wife, Sierra, sat rigidly beside him with a smile that was far too smooth and far too still to be genuine. Her mother, Patricia Hayes, slowly poured herself a third glass of red wine, her sharp, calculating eyes never once leaving my son's pale face. Then, it happened. My son's large hand slipped silently under the heavy linen tablecloth and clamped around my wrist. The grip was shockingly tight, freezing cold, and utterly desperate. It was not a gesture of family affection. It was not a silent attempt at comfort. It was a vice grip of pure terror. His thumb tapped against my wrist 3 times, quick, sharp, frantic. The chandelier flickered ominously above us. A heavy silver fork clattered loudly across the polished table. He slid something heavy and cold against my hand. It was his cell phone. He did not even look at me when he leaned in and whispered, "Mom, please do not argue with me. Just accept it." His deep voice broke painfully at the jagged edges. His right knee bounced erratically under the table, fast and uncontrollable. I barely moved my lips as I breathed out, "Harlan, baby, what are you doing?" He shook his head once. It was a tiny, sharp, defensive motion, and his cold fingers tightened around mine so hard it bruised my skin. Directly across the wide table, Leonard Hayes rose silently from his high-backed leather chair and walked slowly into the darkened hallway. He did not politely excuse himself. He did not offer a host's smile. He simply left the room like a prison warden, stepping out to check on an impending execution plan. Sierra kept methodically cutting her roasted chicken into tiny, perfect, identical squares, but her cold, unblinking eyes never left the side of my son's face. Patricia held her expensive wine glass suspended in the air, like a woman counting down the final seconds on a ticking clock. Something was deeply, dangerously, fatally wrong in that house. My son's thumb moved blindly under the heavy napkin, sliding rapidly across the slick glass screen of his phone. A faint, sharp buzz vibrated into my lap, then another buzz, then a third. He was actively doing something massive, something irreversible, right there at the dinner table. His breathing hitched. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "I only trust you. I have only ever trusted you." My chest tightened so painfully I thought my ribs would snap. The expensive artwork on the walls blurred at the edges. My heart stuttered in a chaotic, terrifying rhythm that made my entire body go freezing cold. I leaned slightly closer to him, desperate to anchor him. "Please do not pull me into anything dangerous, Harlan. I am begging you," I whispered back. I gently touched the back of his trembling hand, and he finally lifted his heavy, exhausted eyes to meet mine. They were wet, they were broken, they were terrified. "Mom, I might be in terrible danger." He breathed. My mouth went instantly dry, my pulse hammered in my ears like a war drum. Every single protective instinct a mother inherently possesses screamed at me all at once. If you are listening to my story right now, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. What happened next is the exact part of the story that my heart has still not fully healed from, and I doubt it ever truly will. My son did not speak another word. Sierra's sharp shoulders tensed visibly. Patricia smoothed her expensive linen napkin with a small, deeply satisfied motion. Then, Harlan stood up far too fast. His heavy wooden chair scraped across the hardwood floor, a sharp, slicing sound that cut the dining room into total, absolute silence. He cleared his throat, forcing a shaky, unconvincing smile onto his pale face. "It has been a very long day at the office. I need to get some fresh air," he announced. His deep voice noticeably trembled on the very last word. Sierra's jaw twitched in deep irritation, Leonard froze in his tracks, Patricia blinked slowly, her eyes tracking him like a hawk. My son leaned down, pressed a soft, lingering, trembling kiss to the top of my head, and whispered so quietly that only I could hear it. "I love you, I will call you later." He turned and walked out of the dining room. No one stopped him. No one asked him where he was going. Sierra did not call after her own husband. The heavy front door closed firmly behind him with a dull, final thud. And that was the absolute last time I ever saw my beautiful, brilliant son alive. The exact moment I stepped outside of that massive, oppressive house later that evening, the night air felt distinctly different. It felt thicker, it felt heavier, it felt like the atmosphere knew a terrible dark secret that my brain simply had not caught up to yet. I held my son's phone tight in my leather purse, but the device felt like it was actively burning straight through the thick fabric. I did not dare look at the screen. I did not breathe properly. I just walked mechanically to my small, sensible car, sat in the driver's seat, and pressed Harlan's name on my own phone before my seatbelt even clicked into place. Ring, ring, voicemail. His recorded voice played softly through the car speakers. Warm, calm, happy. It was a greeting recorded years ago, long before the suffocating fear of the Hayes family had ever touched him. Hearing his happy voice hit my chest, like a physical hammer blow. I hung up immediately and called again and again and again. By the fourth frantic phone call, my hands were shaking so that I actually pressed the wrong contact name twice. I wiped my sweating palms on my skirt and tried one more time. Nothing changed. The phone just rang into the empty void. He was not picking up. The absolute silence felt profoundly wrong. It was far too wrong for a night fraught with so much terrifying, unspoken tension. I drove back to my house on autopilot. Every single red traffic light seemed to stretch on significantly longer than the one right before it. The house felt empty the moment I walked through the front door. I did not turn on the living room lights. I did not want the brightness. I wanted answers. I wanted my son. I sat on the very edge of my sofa in the dark and obsessively replayed the entire dinner over and over again in my mind. His freezing cold hand, his trembling voice, that quiet, desperate whisper he used as if he genuinely believed someone might kill him if he breathed a fraction too loud. I painfully remembered how my own voice had snapped just a little when I told him not to drag me into anything dangerous. I had not meant to sound annoyed or dismissive. I was just terrified. I was caught off guard. But deep, agonizing regret never waits for proper forgiveness. It always punishes you first, and then it forces you to explain yourself later. I called his number again, voicemail. I called again, voicemail. I pressed the glowing phone screen directly against my forehead and tightly closed my eyes. I could literally feel the heavy, suffocating guilt crawling rapidly up my throat, thick and intensely bitter. I should have stood up and followed him out of that dining room. I should have forcefully insisted that he talk to me. Hours passed without my permission. The antique grandfather clock in my hallway ticked in a strange, agonizingly slow rhythm. I kept my exhausted eyes firmly locked on the front door, desperately praying that he might just walk through it at any second. When my vision finally blurred from exhaustion, the uninvited memories slowly began to slip in. I remembered the quiet, peaceful nights when he used to tiptoe into my bedroom as a little boy, whispering, "Mom, I had a really bad dream. Can you stay awake with me?" And I always did. I would curl up right behind him, rub his little back, and hum soft lullabies until he finally fell asleep. For so many difficult years, it was just the two of us against the world. I remembered the late-night bowls of cheap cereal we ate when the monthly rent was far too tight. I remembered the heartbreaking way he clung to my leg at his father's funeral. My son had always leaned on me for everything. Why didn't he lean on me tonight? What was he so terrified of? My chest tightened painfully. I looked at the glowing red numbers on the digital clock. 2:11 a.m. then 2:32 a.m. then 3. a.m. At 3:47 a.m., my logical mind finally admitted a horrifying truth that my desperate heart did not want to accept. Harlan was not simply ignoring my phone calls, something terrible had happened, but I did not stop calling him. When my phone finally died, the sudden silence in the room felt physically alive. I plugged it into the wall charger immediately and stared blankly at the black screen until the bright white Apple logo flickered back to life. No missed calls, no text messages, not even a read receipt on the very last frantic message I had sent him. Baby, please call me back right now. I am so worried. I did not sleep a single second. My eyes burned with physical exhaustion. But my deeply terrified body simply would not allow me to rest. The world outside was slowly waking up. The morning birds started chirping in the trees. Cars began humming down the suburban road. The orange streetlights faded out one by one. Then my cell phone rang. It was a sound so sharp, so sudden, and so loud that I almost dropped the device on the floor. I grabbed it tightly with both shaking hands, my heart pounding against my ribs. I looked at the glowing screen. The caller ID did not say Harlan. It was a blocked, unknown local number. The brief, agonizing pause before I finally swiped the green answer button felt like gravity crushing my chest. And then, a voice flat, official, and devoid of emotion cut straight through my entire existence. This is the Fulton County Police Department. Are you Josephine Blake? We are calling to inform you that your son, Harlan Blake, has been found unresponsive. My vision was blurred with unshed tears, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. Several uniformed police officers walked around the large, paved driveway with practiced, clinical calm. Their deep voices were kept professionally low, and their heavy footsteps were carefully measured. I parked my small car crookedly behind a massive patrol SUV and stumbled out of the driver's seat before my door had even fully swung open. A young, serious-looking police officer immediately approached me. His polite, sympathetic smile stretched thin across his face. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to please stay behind the yellow tape. We are currently handling an active situation." I did not stop walking. My trembling legs simply did not recognize yellow police tape, official rules, or authoritative orders. My only son, Harlan, was somewhere inside that dark, attached garage, and nothing on this earth was going to stop a mother from reaching her child. "Ma'am," the officer repeated firmly, stepping directly into my path and gently blocking me with his outstretched arm. "You cannot cross this line. I am his mother," I said. My voice was so painfully tight and brittle that the words barely escaped my dry throat. That specific word, mother, made the young officer hesitate, but only for a brief, fleeting breath. Before he could politely respond or offer his condolences, she suddenly appeared from the shadows of the porch. His wife, Sierra. Her made-up face was slightly wet, but her cold eyes were not swollen from crying. The few tears sitting on her flawless skin looked like something that had been artificially placed there, not something deeply earned through genuine, agonizing grief. Her father, Leonard Hayes, stood rigidly right beside her. He had one large, heavy hand resting protectively on her shoulder, while his other hand was casually tucked into the deep pocket of his expensive slacks. He looked like a man who was far too comfortable for a horrific scene that should have shattered his family into a million pieces. He confidently turned to the exact same officer who had just tried to physically stop me. "Officer, you really do not need her down here. The county coroner has already seen him. We have this under control." I gripped the cold metal side of the police cruiser just to keep my trembling legs steady. Leonard walked slowly toward me with a deeply forced, artificial softness intentionally injected into his booming tone. "Josephine, it was a terrible accident," Leonard said smoothly. "A tragic, unforeseen accident. You really should go home and rest. There is nothing for you to see here." I stared fiercely at his face. His carefully constructed expression never changed. Not a single muscle twitched. Sierra leaned into his thick arm, looking like they were presenting a unified, rehearsed front to the authorities. It was grief that had been meticulously coordinated and performed for the local police. The officer standing beside us awkwardly cleared his throat, and carefully repeated what he had clearly been repeatedly told to say by the Hayes family. "Ma'am, it currently appears that your son accidentally left his car running inside the closed garage. It caused a massive carbon monoxide buildup. It is an unfortunately common tragedy, common. My son dead in that detached garage, a garage he never even used to park his expensive car, only using it for minor storage." The clinical words jammed painfully in my throat. Another uniformed officer quietly approached and tried gently guiding me toward the concrete sidewalk, away from the crime scene. His firm grip was polite, but his eyes were detached. It was the exact blank look people get when they are just following a bureaucratic script, not listening to a human heart. I ignored him, desperately scanning the wide driveway, forcing my panicked mind to focus on the small details. The heavy, insulated garage door was closed. It looked far too closed, far too perfect, and far too final. Then I saw something else. Harlan's heavy keychain was sitting flat on the clean hood of his brother-in-law's sports car parked nearby. The keys were not dangling loosely from the car ignition. They were not carelessly dropped on the hard concrete ground in a moment of sudden fatigue or accidental confusion. They were placed neatly, like someone had intentionally set them there to clearly stage a scene. Sierra's younger brother, a brash, arrogant young man, walked up quickly and snatched the keys off the hood. He startled when he finally realized I was staring directly at him. He looked nervously at Leonard and whispered something so quietly that most normal people would have missed it. But profound, agonizing grief sharpens a mother's hearing. "At least he signed it," the brother whispered. "Sign what?" My fragile heartbeat thumped so hard against my ribs that it genuinely began to blur my vision, but I kept my eyes locked steady. Leonard quickly placed a heavy warning hand on his son's shoulder. It was a subtle, highly controlled, physical motion, like a powerful man ruthlessly reminding a stupid subordinate to keep his mouth permanently shut. Leonard then turned back to me, adjusting his posture. "We will personally handle everything from here, Josephine," he said, his deep voice wrapped in a sickening calm that made my skin physically crawl. "You really should be with your own family tonight." I did not move a single inch. My stubborn legs simply refused his dismissive command. The young officer standing near me tried one more time. "Ma'am, please, the scene is fully secure. It was just a tragic accident. Secure accident." Their practiced words piled on top of each other, clean, prepared, practiced. Sierra delicately wiped her unswollen cheek with a tissue. "He must have been so tired from working on his new tech company," she whispered dramatically. The tragic sentence did not logically match her indifferent face. A loud, mechanical rattle broke the heavy silence. A county investigator slowly rolled a metal stretcher out from the side door of the garage toward the waiting coroner's van. A stark white sheet covered the body I had brought into this cruel world with my own hands 28 years ago. Seeing my son's distinct, still shape lying rigidly beneath that thin cloth broke something profound inside me that I know will never, ever be repaired. I stumbled backward, my breath trembling. I blindly reached into my heavy purse, desperately needing to physically anchor myself to something solid before my knees collapsed onto the pavement. My phone vibrated against my palm. I looked down at the glowing screen, barely able to read the bright text through the thick, hot blur of my tears. It was an automated high-priority alert from my highly secure banking app. "Incoming verified deposit, amount, $50, SILS dollars." The massive fortune from Harlan's recently acquired tech startup. The lucrative AI company the Hayes family had been trying to force him to sign over to their control. The money he had secretly, frantically transferred to my name right under the dining room table before he was murdered. The sprawling Hayes house felt strange and wrong the exact moment I stepped inside to gather Harlan's personal belongings. It was not just because the massive house was quiet. Homes are naturally supposed to be quiet and solemn after a devastating loss. It felt wrong because nothing inside it looked authentically touched by genuine grief. There were no crumpled tissues scattered on the expensive tables. There were no heavy blankets left rumpled on the couch from someone desperately seeking comfort during a sleepless night. There were zero signs of anyone in that house actually breaking down and crying. His widow, Sierra, walked briskly ahead of me down the long hallway, her thin arms folded tight across her chest. She did not bother to look back even once to check if I was managing the heavy steps or if I emotionally needed any support. "You can just take this box," Sierra said dismissively, finally pointing a manicured finger to a small, taped cardboard box sitting carelessly by the front coat rack. "It is really just old junk he didn't need anymore. Mostly old paperwork from his startup." Her sharp voice held a thin, fake sweetness that never came close to reaching her cold eyes. I bent down very slowly, my hands trembling as I gently touched the rough cardboard. The box felt light. It felt far too light to hold 28 beautiful years of vibrant memories and massive achievements. My chest tightened painfully. Sierra saw my shaking fingers hover directly over the black notebook, and she immediately shifted her weight nervously from foot to foot. "It is nothing important," Sierra added too quickly. Her overly defensive tone made something dark and deeply suspicious flicker intensely in my gut. I quietly lowered the cardboard lid without physically removing a single item. "I will just look at it at home," I said softly, keeping my face blank. Sierra nodded stiffly, but her sharp jaw clenched just enough for me to clearly notice the sudden flash of intense anxiety. I carried the small box out to my car, holding it carefully against my chest, treating it like anything inside might shatter into dust if I moved too fast. The air inside my car still held the sharp, cold sting of something being profoundly wrong. I did not drive off immediately. I placed the cardboard box on the passenger seat and slowly slid the lid back. The black leather notebook lay right on top of everything else. Unassuming, quiet, looking like it had been patiently waiting for me to find it. I lifted it gently. Harlan's distinct, familiar handwriting stretched boldly across the very first page. Sharp, neat strokes that he had meticulously learned from copying my own exact handwriting when he was just a little boy, sitting at my kitchen table. I ran my thumb slowly across the faded blue ink, my breath caught sharply in my throat. I turned the thick page. The early entries were short, small, and purely observational. They are suddenly interested in how I manage my massive company accounts. My father-in-law keeps asking how much liquid cash I have absolute access to. He wants to know the exact numbers. Sierra wants all my secure banking passwords. She claims it is just for family emergencies. They just keep constantly asking me what my startup is financially worth. The handwritten words blurred for a moment, and I blinked hard, forcing my tears away until the blue ink sharpened again. I turned to another page. Dad-in-law wants me to sign a massive legal document tomorrow. He says it is just standard family wealth planning. It does not feel right to me. I feel like I am being cornered in my own house. I pressed my trembling palm flat over the heavy page, desperately trying to steady myself. These entries were not just dramatic, emotional confessions. These were highly specific, methodical breadcrumbs. That was the kind of thoughtful man my son was, thoughtful, cautious, intensely fair. I flipped rapidly to another entry dated 2 weeks earlier. Sierra asked me again what would happen to my AI company if something terrible unexpectedly happened to me. Why is this horrifying topic coming up so often? She seems obsessed with my life insurance. My heart thudded in a slow, agonizingly heavy rhythm. I looked very closely at the handwritten dates. Every single entry documented in the notebook happened weeks or days before the horrific dinner. It happened long before he secretly placed that phone in my hand, long before he desperately whispered that he only trusted me with his life. I held the thick notebook tighter. The air inside the car seemed to constrict around my throat. I flipped the pages significantly faster now, following his terrified trail of thought. My son did not actually realize he was physically leaving a suicide note. He thought he was meticulously building a criminal case file against his own in-laws. Then my shaking fingers paused on the very last entry. It was dated the exact night of the terrifying dinner. They want me to sign the massive asset transfer document tonight. I cannot stall them anymore. They are threatening me. Directly below that terrifying entry was a second, final line. It was shorter, but the pen strokes were heavy. But the company money is safe with Mom now. The entire world around me stilled. The heavy silence inside that small car felt like it was swallowing every single sound in my entire body. My son did not write about crippling depression. He did not write about an overwhelming desire to end his own life in a dark garage. He wrote about intense, strategic preparation. He knew massive pressure was coming for him that night. He just did not know that his brutal murder would immediately follow his refusal to sign away his massive fortune. A freezing cold shiver slid down my spine, but my brilliant boy had outsmarted them at the very last possible second, and he had explicitly left the absolute proof right in my trembling hands. I did not make it inside my quiet, empty house immediately. I sat frozen in the driver's seat of my parked car for what felt like hours, with my son's worn journal resting securely on my lap. The very last entry burned into my retinas, playing on a horrific endless loop in my exhausted mind. The dark blue ink was barely dry on the page. His terrifying final thoughts from just hours before, that fateful dinner, were staring directly back at me. Those were the exact thoughts Harlan intended to tell me, but was brutally murdered before he ever got the genuine chance to say them out loud. My fingers shook every single time I traced the handwritten words. A devastating sound escaped my throat. It was low, fractured, and broken. It was the exact kind of primal cry that rips from a place significantly deeper than your lungs or your throat. It came from the very marrow of my bones, from the exact part of my soul that had raised him alone, loved him alone, fiercely protected him alone, and somehow still tragically failed him at the absolute most critical moment he desperately needed me. Because I did argue with him at the dinner table, I selfishly told him not to involve me. I ignorantly told him I did not want any trouble. And now, every single agonizing breath I took felt like a harsh, physical punishment. I finally forced myself out of the freezing car when the morning sun slowly began to rise. The house felt quiet, clean, and unaware that half of my beating heart was now permanently gone. I desperately needed air, not comfort, just pure, unfiltered oxygen. I stepped outside onto the quiet porch, wrapping my arms tight around my chest. The Hayes family had hijacked the entire memorial service. It was no longer a beautiful, solemn gathering to properly mourn the tragic loss of a brilliant young man. It had been transformed into a flashy, highly publicized networking event for Leonard Hayes. I sat quietly in the very front row of the massive cathedral-style church, wrapped in black, my face obscured by a dark veil. I watched the grotesque, highly orchestrated performance with absolute terrifying clarity. She was wearing a stunning custom-tailored black designer dress that probably cost more than Harlan's first car. She wailed loudly about losing her incredible soulmate, but I closely watched her manicured hands. She never actually gripped the casket. She just lightly rested her fingers on the polished wood so she would not ruin her expensive manicure. Her tears were fake. She was performing like a poorly paid actress in a terrible daytime soap opera. But it was Leonard Hayes who truly disgusted me to the absolute core. He was actively using my son's funeral to secure corporate loyalty and assert his total control over the exact company he had just committed murder to steal. They all confidently thought I was broken. They all arrogantly assumed I was just a poor, irrelevant, grieving mother who had no idea what was actually happening right in front of her face. They looked right past me, treating me like an invisible ghost. They did not know that my secure bank account was currently holding the exact $50 million fortune they had brutally murdered my son to acquire. They did not know that I had already read the journal. And they underestimated how dangerous a grieving mother can truly become when she realizes the exact people comforting her are the exact people who slaughtered her child. I did not shed a single tear at the funeral. I sat still, actively burning every single one of their fake, smiling faces permanently into my photographic memory. By the second morning, immediately after the lavish funeral, I had forcefully learned that profound grief never sits still. It shifts, sharpens, and constantly finds terrifying new ways to cut you when you least expect it. I was sitting alone at my quiet dining table, with Harlan's journal wide open directly in front of me. I had combed through every single page again, meticulously cataloging the terrifying timeline of their intense pressure. But as I gently turned to the very back cover, my fingers brushed against a tiny hidden pocket, carefully stitched into the dark leather. I slid my fingers inside and pulled out a thin folded sheet of thick legal paper. My pulse quickened as I carefully unfolded it. It was crisp and stiff. It was blank in terms of signatures or checkmarks, but the bold black title printed at the very top of the page made my blood run cold. Marital Asset Reallocation Agreement. Directly under the massive, terrifying legal header, Harlan had written a very faint, almost terrified note to himself. They demanded I sign this. I cannot do it. I have to think about this later. The entire room spun. The aggressive pressure had been real. The intense, suffocating fear had been real. I held the heavy document with both trembling hands. The sharp edges cut lightly into my fingers, reminding me that this was not just standard legal paper. It was concrete motive, it was an exact timeline, it was pure, undeniable proof of a deadly conspiracy. Before I could even process the terrifying legal document in my hands, a hard, aggressive knock rattled my heavy front door. It was not the soft, hesitant knock of a grieving family member dropping off casseroles. It was a sharp, aggressive, strictly business knock. It was the deeply arrogant sound of someone who fully expected instant obedience. I closed the black journal slowly, almost reverently, and slid it safely beneath a heavy stack of mail on the dining table, making sure the unsigned contract was hidden. I slowly walked to the door and pulled it open. Sierra's entire toxic family stood crowded on my small porch like a armed procession. Her imposing father, Leonard Hayes, stood in the very front. Her mother, Patricia Hayes, stood right behind him, clutching her expensive designer purse. And standing slightly to the side was a tall, sharply dressed man in a highly expensive charcoal suit, holding a thick leather folder directly under his arm. He was their corporate lawyer. I recognized his arrogant posture long before he ever opened his mouth to state his profession. He physically held himself like someone who was highly accustomed to taking massive advantage of terrible timing. None of them looked like people who had just buried a beloved family member. A mere 2 days ago. "May we come in, Josephine?" Leonard demanded. He did not even wait for me to politely step aside. He simply pushed his massive frame right past me, his expensive leather shoes tapping confidently and loudly against my hardwood floors. Patricia quickly followed him, smoothing her expensive silk blouse as if she was preparing for a wealthy country club luncheon, not intense conversation with a grieving mother. The sleazy lawyer entered last, closing my front door firmly behind him. The air in my quiet living room tightened around us. I did not offer them a seat. I just stood still. They took the seats anyway. Leonard confidently crossed one leg over the other and carefully adjusted his expensive gold cufflinks with slow, deliberate precision. I stood quiet, present, watching every single micro-expression on their fake faces. "Let us get straight to the urgent business, Josephine," Leonard began. His deep voice carried a terrifying authority that was unearned, but demanded. "There are several massive financial matters that must be handled promptly." Patricia nodded her head, rapidly adding, "We do not want any sort of messy confusion or long delays. It is important that everything is transparent." I actively let the suffocating silence make them deeply uncomfortable. The sleazy lawyer cleared his throat, leaning slightly forward. "Mrs. Blake, we are officially here to review all massive financial movements Msian made within the last exact 48 hours directly before his unfortunate passing." The word passing fell out of his mouth like it was just a boring line item on a massive corporate invoice. I finally sat down slowly in the armchair directly opposite them, neatly folding my hands securely in my lap. My breathing stayed even, but deep inside my chest, I could physically feel something cold, dark, and highly dangerous stirring awake. Leonard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Josephine, This is standard legal procedure. We need full, total access to his massive bank accounts, his corporate statements, his wire transfers, and anything of incredible value that changed hands directly before he died. Patricia added softly, her voice dripping with fake, sickening sympathy. You understand how a legal marriage works, Josephine. Everything he had was legally part of their shared household. Sierra is his widow. Their terrifying entitlement filled my living room like thick, highly toxic smoke. I watched them. I actively, deeply watched them. Their eyes were not grieving. Their eyes were calculating. They were rapidly scanning my face for any sign of weakness, for terror, or for the massive guilt they desperately hoped to instantly find. And for the absolute first time, I clearly saw what my brilliant son had seen in those final terrifying weeks. I saw pure, unadulterated desperation. I saw zero sorrow, no love, just a violent, aggressive hunger for total corporate control. I am sure you are feeling overwhelmed, the lawyer said, artificially softening his voice for maximum manipulative effect. But everything your son touched financially, right before his tragic death, must be reviewed by the marital family. The marital family. They did not even have the basic decency to say my dead son's actual name. I did not touch the legal paper. I did not lean in to read the fine print. I did not ask a single, desperate question. I stayed still and actively let their own frantic urgency push them forward into my trap. Leonard exhaled sharply, clearly growing impatient with my terrifying calm. Josephine, we need full transparency from you immediately. Did Harlan transfer any massive assets to your name on the night of the dinner? Their demanding tone, their aggressive posture, their complete certainty, it confirmed everything I already knew in my heart. They were not here to grieve, they were not here to find closure, they were here to quickly secure the exact $50 million fortune they incorrectly believed belonged to them. Mrs. Blake, you are legally required to immediately surrender all massive financial assets. He moved directly before his passing. The lawyer's aggressive words hung in the tense room like a swinging executioner's blade, sharp, suspended, and waiting to brutally drop. I did not flinch. I did not physically shift in my chair. I did not even quickly glance at the intimidating legal paper he had placed directly in front of me. I stayed, utterly still. Silence can be loud when it is intentionally chosen. It can speak significantly louder than screaming anger, louder than frantic explanation, and louder than weeping grief. And right now, in this tense moment, my complete silence filled every single dark corner of that room. Leonard Hayes leaned back in his chair, quickly exchanging a rapid, highly nervous glance with Patricia. They had expected panic, they had expected tears, they had actively expected massive confusion. They got none of that, they just got pure, terrifying, heavy silence. The lawyer cleared his throat again and sharply tapped the legal paper with his expensive gold pen. Mrs. Blake, we will need your full cooperation to move forward with the estate. I blinked once. It was in slow, deliberate blink, but I said nothing. Sierra shifted irritably in her seat. We drove all the way here, she snapped, the fake, sweet widow tone from the funeral dissolving into pure, unadulterated venom. The absolute least you can do is respectfully respond to my father. I calmly folded my hands in my lap, letting the thick quiet gather terrifying weight between us. Leonard leaned forward again, his face turning an angry shade of red. Josephine, you understand your son's massive financial obligations, don't you? His tone held a highly polished, dangerous edge, the kind that cuts without ever raising its physical volume. Still, I said nothing. Sierra's fake patience crumbled first, her aggressive voice cracked sharply across the quiet room. He promised everything to me. Not you, the entire AI company. The millions, it is all mine. Patricia stiffened beside her, visibly surprised that her daughter had let the grieving mask slip so easily. But Sierra did not care anymore. Her cold eyes were wild, deeply desperate, and clawing for something she arrogantly believed she had already fully possessed by staging his murder. I closely watched Sierra, not with angry judgment, not with sad pity, but with pure terrifying clarity. Her aggressive words did not hurt me, they revealed her. She had not cried like a heartbroken widow. She cried like a greedy thief, watching a massive stolen opportunity slip through her desperate fingers. Leonard grabbed her thin wrist, grounding her fast. "Calm down right now," he hissed through his teeth. The lawyer leaned back, actively evaluating me with a new deep suspicion. "Mrs. Blake," he said, pausing to carefully choose his next threatening words. "We are desperately trying to gracefully avoid terrible legal complications. If you refuse to cooperate, we will escalate this straight to federal court." They thought they held all the power. They thought I was just a broken, weak mother. They had no idea that my silence was not weakness. My absolute silence was impenetrable, aggressive armor, and I was patiently waiting for the exact perfect moment to destroy them all. "If you refuse to cooperate with us, we will leave you with no other choice," Leonard threatened, standing up from my couch. "We will escalate this." Sierra leaned forward, her eyes bright with something utterly ugly and toxic. "You do not want to start a legal fight you cannot win, Josephine." Still, I said nothing. He slid the paperwork back into his expensive briefcase, snapped it securely shut, and rose from his chair. "Very well," the lawyer said, artificially adjusting his expensive silk tie. "If this is how you want to officially proceed," he looked at me directly, his voice firm and highly threatening. "We will bring the federal court into this." My house was suffocatingly still when they finally left. It was so quiet that it felt like the walls themselves were actively listening to the lingering echo of their aggressive threats. I securely locked the heavy front door behind Leonard Hayes, Patricia, Sierra, and their arrogant lawyer. Then, I walked straight to the dining table, where Harlan's black journal patiently waited securely beneath the stack of mail like a quiet, reliable witness. My hands did not shake this time when I finally lifted it. I had moved past the shaking phase of grief. I had entered a different kind of terrifying stillness. I opened the journal again, but not to simply read this time. I opened it to actively, methodically examine it. I used my skills from years of working as a highly perceptive financial auditor to tear apart the details. Every single page held significantly more than just written words. There were aggressive dates, scribbled in the margins. There were faint, aggressive indentations where he had paused to think. I began meticulously lining everything up on the large dining table, a page detailing massive pressure from his wealthy in-laws, dated 3 weeks before the horrifying dinner. A terrified note detailing how his massive life insurance policy was updated without his permission, dated 12 days before the dinner. A scribbled entry about Sierra's sudden aggressive interest in his exact corporate AI valuations, dated 9 days before. Another terrifying entry about the massive family plan documents Leonard Hayes had insisted he sign, dated 5 days before the dinner. Page after terrifying page, aggressive detail after aggressive detail. Then, I paired those written clues directly with what I already knew in my heart. The massive, forged signature on that terrifying unsigned marital document. The sudden, suspicious increase in his life insurance payout. The massive arguments he wrote about, but never mentioned out loud to me. Highly suspicious purchases on a shared company credit card for aggressive corporate meetings he never attended. Terrifyingly aggressive calls from unfamiliar, blocked numbers logged in his cell phone history. Once I matched everything with the exact dates in his black journal, everything aligned into a single, terrifying timeline. It was a clear, calculated pattern. It was their pattern. This was not a sad house of grieving, loving in-laws. This was a greedy house of literal murderers waiting for a massive corporate transaction to finally finalize. I leaned back in my chair, the crushing weight of total understanding pressing into me inch by agonizing inch. His death did not look like an accident. It did not feel like an accident. It did not physically move like an accident. It moved like a highly calculated, pre-planned execution. A soft, unexpected vibration buzzed across my dining table. I glanced at the glowing phone screen. It was an unknown local number. My breath caught in my throat for a fraction of a moment before I finally swiped to answer. A quiet, nervous voice came through the speaker. "Mrs. Blake? It is Eric. I am Harlan's lead tech colleague. I remembered Eric. They had worked late nights together building the massive AI project Harlan had been so proud of. I did not know who else to safely call, Eric said, his voice trembling with pure terror. I need to securely tell you something massive, but please, I am begging you, do not ever mention my name to anyone. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. Go ahead, Eric, I am listening, he exhaled shakily. Harlan came to my private office the exact night before it horribly happened. He asked me to quickly look over a highly complex legal document. He said he did not trust it at all. My pulse significantly slowed in a heavy, highly aggressive rhythm. He signed something that exact night? Eric continued. No, he refused to sign it. He did not want to, but they pushed him into a terrifying corner. He looked broken, ma'am. He looked worn out, like a massive part of him was just actively giving up so he could quietly keep the family peace for just one more single day. My grip tightened on the phone. He told me it did not matter anyway, Eric whispered, terrified. He said he had already securely moved the important thing, directly, to someone he trusted. The important thing, the massive money, the $50 million wire transfer. I swallowed hard and thanked him. He hung up quickly, terrified of being overheard. I sat for a very long moment after the call ended, my hands tightly folded, steadying my own breath. I reached for the black journal again, carefully turning to the very last pages. Something slipped out from between the last two terrifying entries. It was thin, jagged, and half-torn, a piece of legal paper. I lifted it with two shaking fingers. The edges were ripped unevenly, like it had been yanked out in a massive, terrifying rush. And slanted lines sharply cut across the page. It was half of a signature, his signature. My heart pressed painfully against my ribs. This was not just a casual note. This was not a diary entry. It was physical, undeniable evidence he tried to remove. Evidence of something he did not want to fully complete. Evidence of a document he was forced toward. The torn paper trembled between my fingers. By the next morning, the torn page felt significantly heavier than the entire leather journal itself. I kept it inside a clear plastic sleeve I quickly found shoved in my desk drawer. Not to carefully preserve it like a sad family keepsake, but to protect it like hard, federal evidence. I did not eat a single bite. I did not sleep a single second. I moved purely on maternal instinct. Quiet, intensely steady, deliberate. There was only one person I trusted to deeply understand what this highly suspicious legal document truly meant. Mr. Holt, my son Harlan's loyal old business attorney. He was not the Hayes family's sleazy lawyer. He was someone my brilliant son had picked years ago, back when his massive corporate success was still raw, new and unclaimed by any greedy in-laws. I called his private office, and the clear tremor in my voice made him urgently ask me to come over immediately. The sky hung gray. As I drove across town, the clouds felt low, pressing against the day, with the massive weight of something intensely unresolved. When I confidently stepped into the upscale law office, the receptionist guided me to Mr. Holt's heavy door without asking a single question. He was already standing when I entered, his face drawn with genuine worry. He did not bother to hide his grief. I am so sorry for your terrible loss, Josephine, Holt said quietly. I simply nodded, too intensely focused to politely respond with words. I placed the black journal securely on his massive desk, then slid the clear plastic sleeve with the torn page forward. His expression changed, not dramatically, just a very slight tightening around his mouth, a tiny crease forming between his brows. Subtle signs of a professional lawyer, seeing something he should never see. Where did you get this? Holt carefully asked. Inside his hidden journal, I replied. Holt forcefully exhaled through his nose. Long and low. Josephine, he said, gently tapping the torn page. This looks like part of a massive marital estate restructuring contract. It is the exact kind wealthy people use to forcefully transfer total control of massive corporate assets in case of complete incapacitation or sudden death. The terrible word death sat between us like a massive stone. He studied the handwriting on the torn page, Harlan's distinct handwriting, then he examined the ripped edges again. Finally, he reached for a heavy binder sitting on the shelf directly behind him. and forcefully flipped through a series of legal templates. When he placed the torn page directly beside one of them, the exact outline matched. Holt closed the binder slowly, the air in the room tightening. "This was not just intense family pressure," Holt stated. "This was calculated. Your son did not finish it. That is why it is torn. Someone actively tried to force him to sign it, and he refused to finish it." Someone pulled it out in a massive hurry. I stared at the terrifying paper, feeling every single word land with cold precision. Holt set the page securely down and folded his hands. "I am going to be honest with you, they were not just preparing to emotionally control him. They were preparing to actively control everything he officially owned. His massive AI company, his investments, his accounts, everything." Holt paused, his eyes fiercely softening. "They fast-tracked his death. Everything in this torn document lines up with what families do when they want massive control before a dead man can forcefully contradict them." A freezing chill moved through my entire body. It was not shock, it was not disbelief. It was total confirmation. "Holt," I said, steadying my voice, "the massive journal is enough to bring them down. I want to destroy them." The confident drive back from Mr. Holt's secure office was the exact first time I did not cry. Grief had held my throat for days, squeezing until I could barely breathe. But now, a different kind of thick air filled my lungs. Pure, unadulterated purpose. I pulled directly into my quiet driveway and cut the engine. The sun was starting to dip, turning the evening squint into a massive mix of bright gold and deeply bruised blue. It was the exact kind of evening that should have felt peaceful. It did not. A heavy dark car was parked across the street. It was not mine. It was not a neighbor's. I recognized it immediately. It was Leonard Hayes's expensive dark sedan. The engine was off, but the car sat angled directly toward my front house, like it was monitoring something. No one was visibly inside. My fragile heartbeat steadied. I picked up the black journal, tucked it firmly under my arm, and fiercely walked inside my house with slow, highly deliberate steps. As soon as I shut my front door, I clearly heard hushed voices. They were not in my house, they were across the narrow distance between my house and Harlan's old home. Their windows were cracked open just enough for the sound to slip clearly through the evening air. I moved toward my side window and cracked it silently. The voices became clear. "We need to clean up the entire mess before anything massive permanently leaks," Leonard Hayes said. A heavy pause, a massive sigh, frantic footsteps. Patricia's voice followed, low and deeply irritated. "Her aggressive silence is throwing us off. She is not scared, something is wrong." Sierra's younger brother spoke next, his tone clipped. "She knows something. I can physically feel it." My fingers curled into my palm. I kept myself still, anchoring my breath. Their terrifying words did not surprise me. They confirmed everything I already sensed. They were not grieving, they were scrambling. "We need to securely secure what is ours," Leonard muttered. "The torn contract is useless without a secondary verification. There has to be another way." Another way. Their massive desperation was not pure speculation anymore. It was audible, sharp, and coordinated. I let their toxic voices fade out and stepped back from the window. My pulse was steady. I grabbed my purse and locked my house, crossing the small yard that separated our homes. Their front door was cracked open, as if someone had stepped out and planned to return quickly. I stepped inside quietly and followed the faint murmurs to the living room. But I did not enter. I did not need to. Something else caught my aggressive eye first. The massive dining table, large stacks of thick papers, heavy legal folders left open, pages spread out like a massive storm had passed through. They had not expected me or anyone else to walk in. They had gotten comfortable, sloppy, and sitting right there on the heavy table, pinned under a massive ceramic coaster, was a thick packet of official insurance documents. I recognized the exact font immediately. I recognized the heavy layout, the formatting. And then I finally saw it, the massive signature at the very bottom, Harlan's exact name, but not his actual handwriting. A massive, forged signature, clean, practiced, highly confident. They had not bothered to hide it at all. My throat tightened, not with any grief this time, but with a rising, controlled, massive fury. I reached slowly into my purse and forcefully pulled out my phone. My hand did not tremble as I angled the bright camera lens directly over the forged papers. Click, one clear photo, click, another click. I framed the forged signature, capturing the exact date printed directly beside it. The terrifying date, the exact night before he was murdered. The air thinned around me. Everything inside had me hardened into something clear and unshakable. I took one final massive photo, making sure every single detail was permanently captured. Then, I slipped silently back toward the front door as heavy footsteps moved closer directly in the hallway. I stepped outside and pulled the massive door gently behind me. My phone buzzed softly. It was informal-sounding text from Leonard Hayes, family meeting at 3:00 p.m. Our corporate attorney will be present. Complete attendance is required, like I belonged beneath their massive authority. Like I was supposed to obey them. I stared at the terrible message until the words lost their absolute shape. Not out of any fear, those terrified days were behind me. I stared because the aggressive tone revealed everything they believed about me. They thought I was still the identical woman from the sad funeral. The quiet, crumpled mother, with massively swollen eyes and trembling hands. The weak woman who sat in absolute silence while they circled her like starving vultures. But absolute silence is not always submission. Sometimes it is the most aggressive strategy of all. At 2:59 p.m., I calmly walked directly into the massive Hayes living room alone. The air inside the room was thick with the nauseating smell of expensive designer perfume, heavy cologne, and pure, suffocating arrogance. Several plush chairs were arranged in a tight circle, but one specific chair was intentionally placed significantly lower than all the rest. They arrogantly wanted me to sit in that lower chair, like a subservient child. I refused. I stayed standing. Leonard Hayes sat upright, his long legs crossed neatly, his large hands folded securely on his knee, like a powerful man about to negotiate a hostile corporate merger. Patricia Hayes perched tensely beside him, tapping her manicured nails loudly against the leather armrest. Their daughter Sierra sat stiffly, her thin lips pressed into a sharp line, her eyes cold. And the exact same sleazy lawyer from earlier confidently waited, with his thick leather folder resting on his lap, prepared to perform on command. "You are late," Sierra snapped. "I arrived 1 minute early," I replied smoothly. "You simply did not answer the door fast enough." Leonard cleared his throat. "Let us begin immediately. We have been patient with your emotional outbursts, Josephine, but this cannot continue. There are massive legal matters that must be addressed." The lawyer opened his folder. Cooperation is the absolute only way to avoid massive legal escalation. Their intense confidence did not match their underlying panic. They said the word legal far too often. They leaned on their expensive lawyer far too hard. They desperately tried to hide their terrifying desperation beneath highly polished voices and crossed legs. But I could see it. It was pure, unadulterated fear wrapped in fake superiority. "We need full access to every single account your son Harlan touched," Leonard demanded. His deep tone clipped. "All wire transfers, all banking passwords, all financial activity." Patricia nodded sharply. "It is our legal right." Sierra lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with pure greed. "He specifically promised me that everything belonged to us. You do not get to hide anything from me." I stayed still. The sleazy lawyer sighed loudly, tapping his expensive pen against the paperwork. "Your continued silence is making this unnecessarily complicated, Mrs. Blake." I let it continue. Sierra leaned forward, her voice trembling with deep, unadulterated frustration. "You are being emotional again. This is why we need to handle all the massive finances. You are not capable of making rational financial decisions right now." Patricia echoed her toxic daughter. "You are deeply grieving, dear. You really should just let the smart people who actually understand massive corporate money take care of things." Leonard added softly, "This is not personal, Josephine. It is purely practical. You simply do not have the sophisticated background to manage large corporate assets." There it was, the intense mockery, the heavy condescension, the highly polished, aggressive cruelty. I did not blink. The lawyer slid another thick paper directly toward me. We are officially giving you one final opportunity to fully cooperate before we proceed legally against you. Sierra crossed her arms. Stop pretending you did not know he planned everything with us. He promised me the entire estate. He promised me the corporate accounts. He promised me massive security. Leonard nodded vigorously. Your stubborn involvement complicates a legal process that should have been simple. Patricia tilted her head. We tried to politely include you, but you simply do not understand how these complex corporate things actively work. Massive threats wrapped in fake concern, heavy mockery wrapped in fake pity, violent demands disguised as polite conversations. Their toxic voices blended into a single terrifying rhythm. Intense entitlement humming beneath every single aggressive word. I stayed silent because absolute silence was the exact only thing they did not know how to fight. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Blake, this will go to federal court if you forcefully refuse to actively engage. You are creating highly unnecessary legal barriers. I took a very slow, deep breath. It was not shaky, it was not weak, it was steady then. I finally moved, no dramatic hand gestures, no raised voice, no trembling hands. I reached calmly into my heavy purse and placed something flat, deliberate and final, onto the massive glass coffee table. Harlan's worn black leather journal, its dark cover seemed to darken the entire bright room. The sleazy lawyer blinked, Leonard stiffened, Sierra's breath hitched, Patricia's hand froze mid-tap. Every toxic voice stopped, every arrogant posture changed, every fake mask cracked. Leonard whispered almost involuntarily. What is that? I did not answer his stupid question. I simply let the massive weight of the black journal speak for me. The journal sat in the direct center of the glass table, like a deep wound slowly opening. They stared at it as if it might bleed right onto their expensive rug. Leonard Hayes's jaw twitched. Sierra's thin fingers curled tightly around the heavy arm of her expensive chair. Even the highly poised lawyer leaned forward just slightly, his calculating eyes uneasy. I opened the black journal with a terrifying calm that did not belong to the broken, terrified woman I had been 2 days ago. My hand moved slowly, highly deliberately, as though every single handwritten page carried a terrifying truth that deserved to be witnessed with incredible care. I stopped on the very first terrifying entry that mattered. My voice was low but steady as I loudly read the exact words aloud. They asked me what I am worth. Why is it suddenly important? Sierra's fake eyes widened. Patricia Hayes froze mid-blink. I turned the thick page, life insurance policy updated again today. No explanation, not my active request. Leonard Hayes forcefully sat up significantly straighter, clearing his throat as if preparing to interrupt me. I forcefully continued, before he could breathe enough air to lie. Father-in-law pushing massive legal documents, family planning, he says, it does not feel right. A highly visible thin line cracked through Sierra's fake composure. The sleazy lawyer forcefully opened his mouth, but I lifted my hand, silencing him without a single word. I did not raise my voice. I did not forcefully rush. I let every single terrifying sentence land where it needed to fall. I forcefully turned another heavy page. Sierra wants my banking passwords. She says it is for sudden emergencies. Why now? Sierra shifted in her plush chair, her made-up face forcefully flushing a deeply guilty, highly terrified red. Another heavy page. They keep asking what massive corporate assets I actively control personally. The intense pressure feels wrong, their massive confidence forcefully unraveled, like a heavy thread pulled far too fast. I set the black journal down for a single moment, not closed, not hidden, just resting openly. I fiercely looked at them one by one. Their arrogant expressions had drained of all human color, their intense arrogance dissolving into something small, thin, and fragile. Then, I flipped to the terrifying page dated 5 days before the fateful dinner. Insurance changed again, massively higher payout. I did not forcefully approve it. Leonard tried to speak. Josephine, this is out of proper context. I slid a heavy set of glossy printed photographs across the glass table before he finished his pathetic sentence. The official insurance papers, the forged signature, the terrifying date stamped clearly. The sleazy lawyer reached for the bright photos quickly, almost desperately, as if grabbing them significantly faster would somehow change what was undeniably on them. His confident face tightened when he clearly saw the heavy signature. My brilliant son's exact name, but not Harlan's actual handwriting. I turned another thick page. He wants me to officially sign something tomorrow. No choice. He says I feel trapped, Sierra gasped softly. Her terrified father shot her a massive warning look, but she could not hide the massive crack running through her fake composure. Patricia finally forcefully found her shaking voice. You are twisting these things, Patricia whispered. I ignored her pathetic excuse, page after heavy page, terrifying entry after terrifying entry. The black journal unfolded a massive, terrifying pattern they never expected anyone to piece together. The intense pressure, the terrifying questions, the massive sudden interest in his corporate money. The aggressive insurance increases, the forged legal documents, the massive arguments hidden behind firmly closed doors. The terrifying phone calls, the final request for him to sign something important. Their terrifying footsteps mapped in blue ink. The sleazy lawyer swallowed hard. These entries could be interpreted in different ways. I reached into my massive purse again and forcefully placed something else onto the glass table. The clear plastic sleeve containing the torn contract. The terrified half-signature. Their arrogant lawyer stared at it, his eyes narrowing, pure dread settling into the deep lines of his fake face. He did not want to sign it, I said quietly. He tore the heavy page out. Leonard Hayes surged forward. That proves nothing. I met his terrified eyes, calm, unmoving, then I turned to the last terrifying entry. The exact one dated the exact night of the terrifying dinner. The dark ink was pressed significantly harder into the thick paper. They want me to sign it tonight, but the company money is safe with Mom now. Sierra's shallow breath broke. Patricia covered her terrified mouth. Leonard's arrogant eyes flashed with pure, unadulterated panic. He could not hide from it. Their expensive lawyer closed his thick folder slowly, defeated already. I lowered the black journal gently, smoothing the torn edge with my thumb. My voice did not rise, it did not shake. It simply carried the exact terrifying truth my brilliant son did not live long enough to say himself. You planned to take everything, I said softly, but he saved it with me. For a massive, agonizing moment, no one breathed. The black journal lay open between us like a federal verdict. The sharp photographs of the forged signatures glared directly under the bright lamp. Leonard swallowed hard and looked at the lawyer for help. The lawyer straightened up, cleared his throat, and tried to carefully steady himself. These exact entries are unverified, the lawyer began. Handwriting interpretations are personal. We do not know the full context. I reached slowly into my heavy purse again. The lawyer's pathetic hands collapsed. I pulled out another envelope, thin, folded twice for privacy. The careful handwriting on the front was neat. I placed it on the table directly beside the journal. Leonard stared at it like it might ignite. What is that? He croaked. I opened the clean envelope and slid out a single thick page. The entire room leaned forward without meaning to. This, I said quietly, is from the quiet neighbor who saw Harlan pacing outside the dark house the exact night before he was murdered. The exact same quiet neighbor who watched him clutch his chest in pure fear. The same neighbor who saw someone else near the dark garage. Sierra jerked upright. That is a complete lie. Patricia grabbed her arm. Stop right now, she whispered. Leonard's terrified eyes narrowed to tiny slits. What neighbor? I turned the heavy page around, so the dark writing faced them. The neighbor's statement was not long. It did not need to be. At 11:34 p.m., I clearly saw Mr. Harlan Blake pacing on the quiet sidewalk, talking on his phone. A large dark sedan pulled up near the closed garage. The tall driver exited, went toward the dark side of the exact house, and stayed for several long minutes. I recognized the driver. It was his wealthy father-in-law, Leonard Hayes. The fake widow gasped. Her terrified mother's hand flew to her mouth. Leonard's arrogant face drained of all blood. Their sleazy lawyer stopped breathing. You confidently called it a tragic accident, I said softly. But he was not alone that terrifying night. Leonard slammed his heavy palm on the table. No, I was not. This does not mean he fell apart mid-sentence, not from fake grief, from pure terror. A long suffocating absolute silence filled the massive room. No one dared to break it. Every single direction they could run emotionally, legally, and verbally had closed. Their expensive lawyer's heavy breathing grew shallow. He wiped his sweating forehead again, smearing the heavy sheen of fear across his fake skin. We need to stop this meeting right now. The aggressive meeting did not end with raised voices or slammed doors. It ended with something significantly quieter. Heavy fear settling into the dark corners of the expensive room, crawling up their spines, tightening like heavy rope. By bright sunrise the next morning, everything had shifted. Mr. Holt called before I finished my first exact cup of warm tea. Bring everything right now, he said. At Holt's secure office, he had assembled an entire massive team. Federal insurance investigators, a heavy financial analyst, and a massive retired police captain. They reviewed every single piece of exact evidence. By late afternoon, the busy police precinct buzzed with massive movement. I stepped outside for a single moment, needing cool air. The bright sky was soft. I felt something present, not heavy sorrow, a massive warmth. My brilliant sons, I am doing this for you, I whispered. Minutes later, 3 massive police cars pulled up in exact front of the Hayes house. Sierra followed, sobbing in exact real terrifying panic for the absolute complete, exact complete exact first perfect total exact time. Justice finally fully strictly arrived. I beautifully safely used my perfect massive son's entire $50 million fortune to build an incredible charitable foundation in his name.